everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to today's Making COP26 Count webinar, hosted by Chartered Accountants Worldwide and the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, ICAS, in partnership with One Young World. My name is David Nussbaum. I'm currently the Senior Independent Director of Drax Group PLC. I'm a board member of the Value Reporting Foundation, a member of ICAS, and until October, I was the Chief Executive of The Elders, a group of about a dozen former presidents and other global leaders working on peace and human rights. And I'm pleased to be your host today, taking you through this exciting webcast. As you'll have seen, we've got a diverse panel of speakers who've joined us today to reflect on COP26 and tell us about how they are taking action in their communities to drive a just transition and mitigate the climate crisis. Now, for those who might not be quite sure what we mean by a just transition, it's described by Greenpeace, no less, as moving to an environmentally sustainable economy without leaving workers in polluting industries and others behind. Well, we're thrilled to welcome over 1,300 attendees from 68 countries today. Wow, that proves that this is such a great international concern and interest matter. And our four panelists come from different places around the world and work in a variety of industries. They are joining us digitally today so that we can have a lively conversation about what changes are happening in their industries, what still needs to be done, and how we can each contribute. Well, I wonder what you thought of COP26. I remember being at COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, where countries failed to reach any significant agreement. But I was also at COP21 in Paris in 2015, when finally there was global agreement on keeping average temperature rises to well below 2 degrees. Well, on the one hand, COP26 delivered pledges to reduce methane emissions, reverse deforestation, amongst others. And I was delighted to see when ICAS published its 10 takeaways from COP26 that the first item on the list was the launch of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. On the other hand, countries agreed only to phase down coal rather than phase it out, and the richer countries are still not delivering the $100 billion a year they indicated several years ago. So, what are we to make of COP26? Well, my own sense is that we might react to the overall outcome much as my parents might have reacted to some of my school reports. You know, not as good as we'd hoped, but a lot better than it might have been. Anyway, today we want to discuss what this is going to look like on the ground, as it were. Is it possible to meet the targets the world has set in a just way? How do our panelists see this happening? From a CA based in Glasgow, whose work includes being part of a UK Restructuring Energy team, to a CA working in a family practice advising clients in rural Australia, from a climate reality leader who has worked in West Africa and Latin America and at the International Renewable Energy Agency, to a consultant and strategist in a leading global energy transition consulting practice. Wow, what a range of people we have with us today. So I'm looking forward to widening my perspective and understanding of the prospects and opportunities for tackling climate change and the roles that chartered accountants can play. And with their range of perspectives, I'm wondering, how are our panelists each tackling these challenges? And I'm looking forward to them inspiring each one of us to act in our own life and work in whatever ways we can. Now, before we hear from the speakers, a couple of housekeeping notes to run through. For those of you having any issues with bandwidth, you should be able to lower the resolution of the stream on your computer so you can see us better. And anyway, we encourage you all to share your favorite quotes or moments from this event on social media. Please add the hashtag #MakingCOP26Count or just #COP26 and tagging us in your posts at CharteredWW and at ICAS Accounting. So on to our speakers themselves. Our first speaker today is live in Scotland, appropriately enough from Glasgow. Claire Martin is an ICAS member and is Associate Director at Grant Thornton, where she supports sustainable growth and business resilience plans. She's also a One Young World Ambassador. So Claire, what do you see as you advise your clients about the implications of climate change?
Thanks, David, for the introduction. And I think, yeah, as you say, just a little bit of scene setting. I'm based in Glasgow, and it really was incredible to see the energy in the city during Cop26 and its reach. And just by way of brief aside, my own nephew, who's the age of 8, was discussing Cop26 at school and its goals. And I think that it really will have a lasting positive impact on the people of Scotland and their actions, and really looking forward to discussing with everyone today our views on what action it will bring globally, and as you say, what we are seeing from an advisor perspective. Location is also an important point for me to address, just referencing the 2019 legislation that the Scottish Government brought in to make legally binding commitments for Scotland to be net zero by 2045. And one of our government ministers actually has just transitioned as a named portfolio area, so really keen to discuss that further today too. So in my role at GT, as you say, I work in the business advisory team, supporting businesses in times of challenge or change to ensure they're resilient and on a sustainable growth path, working across a number of sectors, but with a particular interest in the energy sector, working on large-scale renewable projects and ensuring that they are viable and offer supply chain benefit. So COP26 reflections from the perspective of an accountant in practice and an advisory role. I think it's fair to say the concept of the Paris Agreement was pretty well understood by the general public prior to the run-up to COP26, but almost as a government level problem to solve. And really prior to the last 24 months or so, out with conversations with those in the public sector involved in the planning of COP26, wasn't really much of a talking point with businesses or other advisors. And then as we got closer to it, all of our local market conversations with other intermediaries did bring up COP, and there was a real acceptance, I think, from the advisor community here that the outcomes of COP, direct or indirect, would have a long-lasting impact on how we see the market and how we interact with clients. ESG concerns really a market imperative for the mid-market. And so the challenge for us is then, how do we discuss and communicate these points as professional advisors for businesses that are not yet in the mindset of prioritising ESG or net zero into their business plans? The recent Chartered Accountants Worldwide survey referenced just 16% of those interviews thinking that their organisation was on track to achieve net zero by 2030. So still a long way to go, but I think for me a real positive of COP was the corporate buy-in and some of the really significant fringe announcements from the corporate community that we should see as genuine positives and not as a greenwashing exercise, which from our perspective and from an advisory role brings into sharp focus the impact of such announcements on the supply chain of businesses that large businesses have already made significant net zero commitments. These types of customer are going to look to have suppliers embed into their own business the same net zero goals and be able to evidence it back to those customers. So management teams of mid-market and SME businesses in those supply chains really need to be thinking about the kind of post-COP net zero mindset world now. So in terms of high-level actions, really early engagement with your key players is absolutely fundamental, being your customers and your lenders, and the influence they will have over ESG and net zero conditionality embedded into future contracts and access to finance. It's very much an emerging area for lenders, but good to have those conversations early. Don't fall behind the competition. Customers are really recognising the value of suppliers that are already addressing ESG concerns, but also that will need investment from you as a business. Draw on external support where you can would be another one, and see it as a worthwhile investment of management time. We're finding a lot of management teams really fatigued by all the challenges that COVID has brought to them over the last year or two, and so in some are putting it on the back burner in terms of the net zero agenda and really that there's not the time to do so. So I think, yeah, just that hopefully sets a little bit of the scene around some of the kind of actions and areas where we're certainly working with clients on at the moment, around that business plan, forecast interrogation, and really challenging the status quo with a net zero lens. Probably just closing from an advisor perspective on 2 points. This is very much a new and emerging area, so advisors are not coming to businesses with all the answers, but really keen to work and support them alongside them. And if you are here in the audience as someone that engages with professional advisors, make sure you're challenging them on what their own ESG commitments are, and make sure you've got advisors on side that are actually practicing what they preach. So that's probably a point to close on for now before the panel.
Great, thank you very much, Claire, and especially thanks for those insights into the changes that are happening for businesses of all sizes, and how the increasing focus on ESG considerations is demanding responsiveness from business, even despite the pressures of the pandemic that, of course, we're all experiencing. Well, we now take a long but virtual and carbon neutral flight to the other side of the world to hear from Sarah Becker, a chartered accountant and director of Becker & Co, a boutique chartered accountancy firm in regional Queensland, Australia, with a lot of primary producer clients. Sarah, I know you've been reflecting on what climate change and our response to it means and how this connects to other themes. Share something of your perspective with us, would you?
Thanks for that kind words and opening comments there, David. I'm actually going to start with a poem to probably set the scene a little bit as to where I am and where maybe things are at in this part of the world. So just bear with me through this part. Okay, I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, of drought and flooding rains. I love her far horizon, I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror, the wide brown land is for me. This extract of a poem was actually written by Dorothea McKellar in 1908, while she was in England and was clearly homesick for her country in Australia. And whilst this poem was actually written in 1908, I think it's still highly relevant for me today. The rest of this poem actually goes on to talk about Mother Nature with the pain that she causes, bushfires, droughts, floods, but also about her magnificent beauties, her sunrises, her sunsets, just to name a few. We have never been able to control Mother Nature, and her strength is that we will never be able to. However, we can be connected to her and ensure she is a part of our everyday life. I know I am strongly connected to her, and that is one of the reasons I live where I live. So I live in Rockhampton in central Queensland, Australia, or as I explained to David earlier on, about 2,000 kilometres north of Sydney, which is where most people know about Australia. My hometown is the beef capital of Australia, and it is on the doorstep of the Great Barrier Reef, but also to the Bowen Basin, the largest coal reserve in Australia and the world. So you could say the region that I live in is blessed with Mother Nature and her finest assets. I really wanted to set this scene as to who I am and where I am physically speaking from today, because I can also proudly say that I'm a beef producer and a chartered accountant who owns a specialised rural accounting and advisory firm in Rockhampton. So from Cop26 and just in the media in general, we've heard a lot about this sustainability crisis and resilience, but I really think it's time for us to break these words down and what do they really mean? Because I'm a strong believer that actions speak louder than words. I feel we all have a role to play in regards to the required actions, and I believe as chartered accountants, we are all in such a strong position to advocate for the direction of the required policy, but also advocating for our clients and the regions that we represent. An aspect that is quite real for me as a young individual who has chosen to live in a rural and regional area is the concept of urbanisation. I believe the way forward around sustainability must consider not just providing a solution to the large cities, but also consider the rural and regional areas. And I raise this in the following context. Everyone used to have that country cousin, or they were that country cousin. Everyone knew where their fresh fruit, vegetables, and meat came from, or they simply grew their own. And life was pretty simple, right? But we fast forward to today, and all everyone can say is how busy they are. And busy and disconnected from what I believe is the grassroots of society, being connected to Mother Nature. We are trying to undo the industrial revolution that has built the world we live in today. This revolution gives us everyday luxuries, and it is a luxury for some, but I acknowledge not for all countries around the world. And it's something that we've come to demand. We are all sitting in our heating or our cooling if you're on my side of the country, and we're all on our laptops and have every bit of technology at our fingertips, and we're all most likely wearing synthetic fibers. I think there's too much focus on blaming fossil fuels and not enough focus on where the demand for these fossil fuels has come from, which I believe is urbanisation. Has anyone asked what damage urbanisation has done on the environment? Why shouldn't capital cities be given closures and restrictions like what rural and regional areas are getting thrown at them? There are alternates to fossil fuels, but it is not as simple as switching off one and pressing go on the other. And also the reality is, if we pick on wind power, you're going to need naturally dug up resources to build these items. So I am that Australian country cousin who has come from a sunburnt country. I believe we are on our way to being sustainable and resilient. And I really welcome today for us to unpack that a bit further, to explore the concept as chartered accountants, to drive and direct policy from our individual perspectives in order to achieve sustainability within the whole of society. I believe we all have such an important and positive role to play within this.
Sarah, thank you for those reflections and including that wonderful poem on what climate change means, informed by your work with primary producers, but highlighting some of the challenges and dilemmas that we face as a society.